Hey everyone, I hope you all are doing good and having a wonderful day. In this video, I'm going to show you that how we can find insecure direct object references or IDOR by bypassing some of the common protection mechanism that developers implement. But before diving deep into this video, if you haven't checked out my previous video, then go ahead and check it out. The link is given in the description as well as you can see it at the right side of the screen. And now, with that being said, let us get started. Okay, so for the sake of demonstration, I have created this very small lab that's going to show you exactly how one of these methods through which you can bypass IDOR security mitigation works. Okay, so let's try to go ahead and see that. And obviously, in real world scenarios, you're going to apply this same methodology. Okay, it's going to work if the application is vulnerable. So first thing first, as you can see, we have an application over here, and let's try to understand this application as a normal user. Let's try to browse this application as a normal user. So first thing I'm going to do is that if I'm seeing this application for the first time, let's try to go ahead and create an account over here. So we'll go to create account. Let's give it something, pentest user, pentest @B practical tech. Let's add any number, 112233445 test, and let's put password as password, all simple thing. And let's try to turn on the intercept and click on create account. Okay, we have this request over here. We'll just send this to repeater, forward the request, and we'll name this as registration. Okay, registration functionality. This is like the first thing that you should be doing when you are understanding or analyzing any application. Okay, as you can see, we have the account created. Let's try to go ahead and log in. So we'll type pentest @B practical, and the password is password, and let's try to go ahead and click on sign in. Again, there's this request getting sent. Let's send this to repeater, and we'll name this as login. Okay, and here we are. Now when we want to identify IDORs, what we basically want is we want a functionality that is accepting some kind of unique identifier which is related to this particular account only. For example, maybe the user ID of this particular account or this particular profile is 91 or 81 or something. So this is like the unique identifier for this particular account. So whenever, let's say, we are doing something, for example, updating our profiles, adding comments, deleting our accounts, or etc., this unique identifier is going to be used so that the changes is going to be made into my account only, or this particular account only, right? So we want to access an application like that, a functionality like that. And one of the most common functionality that implement this kind of algorithm is profile change functionalities, where you can update your profile, change password functionality. If there's a different application, maybe like, for example, if there's a social network application, then you can use the comment section functionality, file upload functionality, and a lot of functionality. It totally depends on what the application is. Okay, but one of the most common functionality across all of these different applications can be profile update and password change functionality. So we'll try with that. So we'll go to my profile and we'll try to update this particular profile. Okay, so we'll just go to proxy, turn on the intercept, and let's click on save changes. Okay, save changes, and I can see this is the request getting sent. Let's send this to repeater. Okay, and we can say that this is the profile change functionality, right? So I'm going to click on send, and you can see that it's saying that the data has been successfully updated. And we can see in the parameter as well that there is this unique identifier. So my profile has a unique ID which is 8. Okay, and we all know that in simple IDORs, what we basically do is we try to manipulate this ID to a different ID, right? So let's try to change this ID from 8 to 7. Okay, just to see whether it is accepting it or not, and click on send. And as you can see, we've got this particular error, right, which is forbidden and you're not authorized to modify this resource, right? Which means that probably the IDOR mitigation implementation has been successfully implemented on this application, right? This is what most people are going to say, most people are going to think. For now, this seems to be not vulnerable, right? But now let's try to go ahead and see that how we can find or go behind this mitigation to see to identify a particular IDOR. So let's try to go ahead and see that. Now, because we want to validate this finding, let's try to go ahead and create another account. Okay, so we'll try to go ahead and create another account, and then we'll try to see whether there's an IDOR vulnerability or not. So very quickly, let's just do pentest2 at the rate be practical.tech. We'll leave all of this as it is. Let's say password, again the same password, and we'll click on create account. Not now, and as you can see, account has been created. Let's try to log in. Pentest2 at the rate be practical.tech, password, and we'll click on sign in. As you can see, we are logged in. Let's try to go to my profile and let's click on save changes. So click on save changes here. In the response, we can also see that the ID is 9. Okay, so for this particular user, obviously we have created another user, so you can see that the ID is 9. Also, you can notice this very interesting thing, that before that, for the previous user, the ID was 8, but now the ID is 9. This also tells us that they're using incremental values, not random user IDs to assign unique identifiers to the profiles. Okay, which is also like a vulnerability, because if there is a vulnerability like IDORs or something, we can chain it, and or we can exploit IDORs on masses. Okay, so this can be like from a high severity vulnerability to it can go directly to a critical level vulnerability. Okay, with that being aside, let's try to see that was the issue that I was talking about. Okay, so as you can see over here in the profile change functionality, we know that the request getting sent to update the profile is patch, right? The request method is patch and the endpoint is profile. Okay, so you can see we are clearly getting this error. Let's try to change the ID from 8 to 9. Okay, and again we'll see this error. Okay, first thing first, what we'll try to do is we'll try to change the patch method to something else, for example post. Okay, let's send request, and you can see that it returns 404 not found, which means that there is no endpoint which is sending request on post. Okay, fair enough. What we'll try to do is we'll try to go back to the login functionality as well as to the registration functionality, and we'll try to see what is the difference in the request. Okay, and here you can see this very interesting thing, which is this method parameter value, and the method has been set to put. Okay, what I basically want to say is that, for example, let's just change this to pentest 5 just for the demonstration. Click on send, and you can see it is redirecting us to login. Okay, but the interesting thing is that the main request getting sent to the registration endpoint is post, right? But in the method parameter, it is mentioned that we are using put. Now this is something very interesting. So the actual request which is getting sent to the registration endpoint from the request from our browser is a post request, right? But here we have a very interesting parameter which is underscore method, which has been set to put. So we want to understand which particular method has been set over here or getting in used over here, right? So let's try to do one thing. We'll try to remove method parameter directly from here. So now we are sending post request. Let's send the request, and you can see we are clearly getting 404 not found, which basically means that from the client side we are sending a post request, but this method parameter is overwriting the request from post to put. To confirm my hypothesis, what I'll try to do is I'll try to change this request from post to put directly. Okay, and we'll try to see pentest 6. Let's change this to pentest 6, and if this is vulnerable, we should be able to see a different response. And you can see it has redirected us to login functionality, login endpoint, right? Which confirms that this method parameter value over here is something which is overwriting the existing method of the request, right? For example, if the request is put and we change it to get, okay, we are getting 200. Okay, so even though the clients from the client side we are sending a post request, this method parameter is overwriting the request to get. Now this is something very interesting, because if this exists on the profile change functionality, the probability is very high that we'll be able to bypass the issue, Okay, the problem is that if you go to profile change, you will see that there is no method parameter embedded directly into it, but we can actually force this method parameter into the body by simply doing like adding this extra parameter. So we'll do method equals to put. Why I'm doing put, you may say, let me just send this to repeater again, because you can see, sorry, we need to put patch over there. So you can clearly see that the request responsible for updating the profile data is patch, right? Why I have changed it to post, the reason is actually very simple. Let me show you this. Let's go here, because the moment we hit post, the error or the difference in the response was very clear. For example, you can see in patch we are getting 403 forbidden, but when we change it to post, we are getting 404. This time we are not getting any forbidden issue, or forbidden error. So this means that there is no authorization check on the post endpoint. Okay. And this issue is that even though there is no authorization check on the post endpoint, the actual method being used to update the data is patch, not post. Okay, so we have basically identified that if we use post request on the same endpoint, we are basically bypassing the authorization. But we need to somehow still hit the patch endpoint, but pretend to be sending a post request, something like that. And that's why what we'll do is that we'll change this method from put to patch. Okay, and as you can see, the id is 9, and we'll modify it to, let's say, attacker, and let's click on send. And now as you can see, the data has been successfully updated, and now we have successfully got an IDOR vulnerability. To confirm this, let's go back and to the victim's account, and let's click on refresh. And as you can see, the name has been changed from pentest2 to attacker. This confirms the IDOR vulnerability. Now you may be thinking that, okay, I have understood how this particular vulnerability can be exploited, but why this vulnerability is happening at the very first place, right? So let's try to go ahead and analyze the source code a bit to understand why this vulnerability actually happens in real world scenarios. So let's try to go ahead and see that. Okay, so as you can see, here is the code. Okay, let's try to analyze what is happening over here. So the very first thing is this authentication function, which is basically determining whether the user is authenticated or not if they want to access anything that requires authentication, for example accessing the dashboard page and all, and it's working fine. You can see that if there is no session in the cookie, which is basically this, okay, we are basically going to redirect them to login. Okay, it's very simple. Then we have this app.use profile section, which is actually very interesting. Okay, let's try to see. So this particular function is going to be applying on all the request method getting sent to this profile endpoint. Okay, so let's try to see what the developer has written over here. So you can see it says that if request.method is patch, okay, which is this method. Let's go all the way here. If request method is patch, okay, the very first thing that it is checking is that whether the request session is present or not. Okay, if it is present, then it's going to work fine. Otherwise, it's going to say that please authenticate to continue. As you can see, the session is there. Okay, then the second thing which is happening over here is that first it is enumerating the request body, the request body ID. So first it is fetching the request body ID over here. Then it is fetching the session ID from this session ID. Okay, and then what it is doing is that it is comparing both of these ID. Okay, if the request ID is not equals to the session ID, then we are getting this issue that forbidden, you are not authorized to modify this resource, which is exactly what we got when we change the ID. So when we change the ID to 7 or 9, we got this issue because this ID and the session ID, like if you need to like decrypt it, but decryption is happening at the backend part. Okay, so the backend is decrypting this, and then it is comparing that the session ID is whether it equals to the ID which is given in the request or not. If it is not equal, then we are getting this particular issue, this particular error, which is actually very well implemented. So there is no issue in this particular function. This particular function is working fine. Okay, so if request method is patch, and if it is not patch, what the application is doing is moving to the next thing. Okay, whatever the logic has been written. Okay, which is basically, if this condition is false, then we are basically going to update the user's detail. Okay, which is what this next function means. Let's try to go down, and you see we have also this function, okay, which is basically an override function. So what it is doing over here is that if the request body contains this method parameter, we are basically changing the request, to the new request which is defined in the method parameter. Now you also may be thinking that why this is here at the very first place. So this depends on how the application was designed initially. This override function also gets implemented when the developer is in testing mode and all those things. More or less, if you talk about the vulnerability, this is what is happening over here. Okay, so when we are using this method parameter, the request is getting overwritten. Now the issue arises when we are doing something like this. So over here you can see that the request that we are sending initially, like on the client side, on the very top of it, is the post request. Okay, and when we do that, we'll basically bypassing this whole code. Okay, why? Because it is checking whether the request method is patch or not. If it is patch, only then it's going to verify whether the session ID equals to the ID provided in the request body or not. But here you can see that the request we are sending here is to the profile endpoint is post, right? So we're sending request to profile endpoint, so it will go inside this code. Okay, it will go inside this code, but it will not go over here. Okay, instead it will pass to the next function, and then when it's going to pass to the next function here is the override function. So automatically, after this gets checked, will be passed to the next function, and the next thing that we have is the override function. And in the override, we have specifically mentioned that the request is patch, right? And now since we have bypassed this function directly, the next function is patch. So this override function is automatically going to redirect the request to the patch request. Okay, and if we scroll all the way down, here you can see here is the actual request which is updating the data, right? So the override function is automatically going to redirect us to the patch function, and this is why, since there was no authorization check, we were able to bypass this IDOR restriction. So it is as simple as that. I hope you guys have understood this. So yeah, this is the reason why we are able to successfully exploit this IDOR vulnerability. I hope you guys have understood this. If you guys have any doubts or any issues, always feel free to leave your doubts or issues in the comment section. And now, with that being said, keep learning, keep hacking, and thank you so much for watching this video.